our title of today is Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste, and we really don't mean to trivialize the crisis, but this current situation is really calling into question how we live, who we are, what we value, and things are changed, and they're probably never going to go back to the same. And so change and disruption creates opportunities. And so we're change makers. People in the not-for-profit sector are change makers. And so we should be a part of how this all comes out and look for opportunities where change, we can grab some of this disruption and turn it in something more positive that helps us not only survive, but makes a more equitable world, and a world in where we can do the type of change-making work and be creative about it and be part of coming out of it rather than a victim to it. And so we wanted to emphasize that this morning. And I've been reading a number of articles in preparation for today, and I read one that was really practical that I liked because it kind of repeated what we say so much. And it was, number one, take care of your customers, which in our cases sometimes are our funders and the clients that we serve. Get a handle on your cash flow. And of course, we preach that every time. Adjust your offerings to satisfy an unmet need, which is prioritizing what you do and don't do, and be willing to adapt the way you do business, which we're all forced to do because of being online and working remotely. Really changes things. So today we're going to have Jeremy Hobbs, the CEO of West Wind Foundation, give us an update on the PPP loans. We're going to have Susie Gomez from the Inland Empire Community Collaborative, who many of you know, talk about collaboration and partnerships and how that's key to sustainability. And I'm going to close with a piece on how to use technology for survival in these times. This should last about 40 minutes. So with that, I'll introduce Jeremy Hobbs. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Stephen, and hello, everybody. It's nice to join you on these calls. I know we all have a lot going on, and as you're working on your organizations, we appreciate you joining us and adding your input and just being in here as this group of people who are working through a very challenging time. Before I jump into some updates on the PPP loans, I did want to follow up on a couple of things Stephen said. You know, this is a challenging time. It's when we have a lot of different things happening. Is there some static in my talk, or is it clear? Is it clear now? Okay. And one of the things that I think, some of the advice that we've been giving and some of the talks that we've been giving over the last few months, there's some pieces that maybe people say, well, I don't quite understand why you suggest we do that. And I wanted to follow up on a couple of those things. One of the things that we've stressed so much is having what we call a kitchen cabinet or a board of advisors for someone who you can rely on, you as an executive director or a person at a nonprofit. These are the kind of times when you really need those people, because as Stephen started out, this is a time of crisis, and we can't let that crisis go to waste. That's not a cavalier statement. It is that we have no choice. We've got to work our way through it. And what it does, if we're capable of doing it, is to open our eyes to what other opportunities we have and what better ways we can serve the people who we're serving. And so I think that having a group of people, a group of advisors we can really count on to say, hey, I have a couple different ideas. Can you think through those and let me bounce them off you? And they may be not the greatest ideas in the world, but I want to test them. And I think we come up with better decisions. I'm certainly doing that in everything that I'm working on. Every day I'm asking those questions, and I'm relying on the people who are around me to say, hey, what do you think about this idea? How about if we do this way? And it's probably never been more important time to have that ability. And I do urge us all to ask the question, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Let's look at what our mission is, what the services we're providing, and then let's ask the question, why are we doing it the way we're doing it? If we look at some of the arts organizations, for example, I'm seeing them do some really innovative things. Some people are already talking about when things loosen up, of moving their theater performances from the inside to the outside to make it easier to deal with the social distancing expectations that they have. But it also is bringing some comfort to the customer base, right? People are probably going to be more comfortable watching an outdoor performance than they will be jammed into a theater. So we all have to be thinking about what we can do differently, what we can do to have our mission survive, and also, is it still the best mission? We look back at the AIDS crisis and what was needed in 1982, in 1984, in 1990, and 1996. There were fundamental changes as needs changed in the community, as the disease changed, as treatments finally came online. Things were very different, and those organizations have developed over many years. And we see a progression. We're all going to face the same thing. Our organizations are going to go through some change. And we really always want to be asking the questions, what services am I providing? Why am I doing it? Is that the best way to do it? Is that the optimal way to do it? And I think those are sometimes some hard decisions, because a lot of us like to keep the status quo. It's more comfortable to know that we have our 15 employees and we're doing our services the way we did our services in January, and we're doing a pretty good job of it. But we have to really look hard at, can we continue to do that? And is it the best thing for our organization and for the individuals we're serving? I'm going to jump into the PPP loans. We're in the second round of PPP funding. As of Tuesday night, there was still about $100 billion available. That was Tuesday night, so I'm a couple days out of date, but I don't have any more information on that. There are a lot of applications still in the queue. I hope if you are interested in the PPP loans, I hope you've already applied and are somewhere in the process. You should keep tracking down your local banks or the financial tech organizations online to see what's happening. Be ready to supply all the information they need. We covered that in a couple of the previous webinars, but I think people are pretty comfortable with it now. What is happening, though, is that there are shifting standards happening, and we need to recognize and talk about those standards. And what I mean by that is, technically the language of the law hasn't changed, but the language of the law was very ambiguous at the start. And now we're seeing the SBA and the IRS make some findings that either tighten or change some of the expectations that borrowers had. And this is mostly found in the for-profit world, by the way. I haven't seen anything directed at the nonprofits, and I think they're in a slightly different situation. But I think we just all have to recognize that if we've applied for a PPP loan, we're going to be into uncharted territory here. I mean, the government has never done a program like this. Banks have never gotten $600 billion out the door before in a month's time, and we're not used to what's happening, and that's ignoring any of the political currents that are going on related to the program. So one of the things I'm going to suggest, and it relates to PPP, flips back to what we opened with, is we're going to all have to be very flexible and ready to change. And maybe you've got one idea that you had last week, and this week, it's not a good idea based on something you figured out about the PPP loans. But again, what we need to do is to make sure we're complying with whatever the regulations are on the use of those loans. And that's been a big issue for a lot of nonprofits as well as profit businesses. And I'm going to give the quick response to what you can use the money for and how is forgiveness different than a loan. The same categories of expenditures are allowed whether it is for the use of the loan or you're trying to have the loan forgiven. It's exact same expenditures. At least 75% of the funds have to be used for payroll. And payroll is defined term. It's not hard to find. We've put in some information on the website that defines all those things, but at least 75% has to be used for payroll. The rest can be used for payroll than that, more than that. And it can also be used for rent, for mortgage payments, and for utilities. And that's it. If you thought, and I use this example, if you thought that it would be a good idea to go use that money to buy a van to move your clients around, not a good idea, because that is not what these loans are allowed to be used for. And they're going to be very tight, we believe, on the audits on these loans. The banks will look at them carefully, and maybe the SBA will. They've promised audits of everything over $2 million. But that doesn't mean if you have less than that, that you're not going to be subject to a pretty tight scrutiny. So keep great records. Make sure your bookkeeper, your accountants are keeping very good records of the use of those funds. If $100,000 came into your organization, you want to be able to turn to the bank and account for $100,000 going out, of which at least $75,000 was spent on payroll. And the other 25% was either spent on more payroll or on those other two categories. So the only difference between forgiveness and loan is timing. It's the exact same expenditures. The only difference is that if you spend it within the first 8 weeks, 56 days of when that money hits your account, and it's 56 days, that money, you can make an effort to get that money forgiven. It's the same type of expenses. If you spent a bunch of money on day 62, you won't have it forgiven. It'll be a loan. Same categories of spending, but that's the way the program works. And so, again, reiterate, you want to make sure you're keeping clear records, you're understanding when money is going out, you're spending it on the allowable things and nothing else. And I think it's going to be really important because by the way, to get a forgiveness, we're all going to have to apply to our banks for forgiveness. It's not an automatic thing. It will be an application process that you'll put in at some point in the future. Again, we're in a changing world, so we don't have all the requirements and the process by which that's going to happen. But at some point, each organization is going to make an application to the bank and say, we'd like this amount forgiven because this is how we spent it in those first 8 weeks. So that's the status of where we are now. I want to give you a couple other little updates just because it's smart for all of us to be paying attention to what's going on. There's a considerable amount of industry and trade lobbying going on to try to change some of the requirements in the PPP loan. The biggest one being to try to extend the time. So don't make us spend the money in the first 8 weeks. And this is especially true of organizations like restaurants that are not allowed to be open or not allowed to be serving people in their dining rooms. And so they're saying, why are we spending all of this money? Why are you forcing us to spend all this money in order to get forgiveness? And we should extend that out. And that may apply to some of our nonprofits. I think it will. Do you really need to ramp up to this full capacity that we had back in January, or can you bring it on a little more slowly? Does that effectively work your organization? But those changes have not been passed into law. There have been no regulations that have been come out. So unfortunately, what we all have to do is live by what's in front of us today on Friday morning, and operate our organizations in light of that. But there will be changes. There will just be changes in what's happening. And that leads me to my last point on this before I turn it back over to Susie. A lot of us, I think, when we looked at this loan program, we thought that the most effective thing we can do is get as much money as we can and spend it in 8 weeks, because it'll be free money. It'll be a grant, in other words, right? It turns from a loan into a grant. By the way, just so we remember, the terms of the loan are that the loan will be due in 2 years. It's a 1% loan. There's about 6 months of deferral of the interest. So it's pretty cheap money, but it will have to be paid back if it is the loan. And a lot of us said, let's do everything we can to spend that money as quickly as possible. And the original intent in Congress was that that's what we do. This was kind of an unemployment program is essentially what it was. It was in a different name. And now the administration and the IRS, the SBA are kind of changing their minds a little bit. They don't know quite if that's what they want to take it. And also the way that this pandemic is playing out in the United States, it doesn't look like it's going to be over nearly as quickly as people hoped when this PPP loan was first passed. It seems like it was 100 years ago. It was only a month ago that it was passed, a little more than a month ago. So what I want to ask you to do is, we always have to be careful when we're in organizations that are looking for funding from various sources. We always have to be careful not to chase money to change our program. Sometimes we have to make slight modifications, but I think you've all probably dealt with this sometimes when a grant proposal looks great, but you realize as you're working through it, that you're gonna have to fundamentally change the way you're doing your business, and that becomes something that's not good. Well, I'm gonna suggest to you that you look at the PPP loans in the same way. You know, if it makes the most sense for your organization to spend all of that PPP money in the next 8 weeks from the day you got it, well, then do it. But if it doesn't make sense, if you say, you know what, I'm going to be far better served to lay this money out at a lower rate and make sure that I have some money left in September and October, even though it's going to be a loan at 1%, you've got to do that. And this is not an easy decision. That's why, again, why we push so hard for having that, not just your board of directors, but that kitchen cabinet, the people you can go to and say, hey, I've got different ideas. What do you think about this? That may involve things like laying off some employees that you're not really excited about laying off. The one, one consolation you may have is that the unemployment benefits are quite rich right now. There's an extra $600 a week for the next about month and a half, and that can help some of your employees. But what I'm suggesting is you really have to be focused on what you're doing in your organization and why you're doing it. That's the high level concept. But as we drill down to it, part of that is, how do I best use these loans for my organization? And it can change, and don't be afraid of changing your mind. I'm working with an organization now. We've changed our minds 3 times in 3 weeks. And I'm going to say that each time we've made a decision, it made great sense at the time. And then a new regulation comes out or a new approach comes out, and we have to rethink things. That's what makes this, maybe when we look back at this in a long time, we'll say, what an interesting time that was to be in. As we're working through the decisions, it's very challenging. So I really urge you to continue. You've got to, in this situation, we've got to be thoughtful and we have to be quick, because you want to make sure you're positioning your organization for delivering the services going forward over a long period of time. We don't just want to do a one shot and then come July 15th, we look at each other and say, wow, I spent all my money and nothing's coming in. I especially say this because of the news that came out yesterday. Those of us who are counting on state dollars or state contracts or county contracts, the state of California took 8 years to build up a $22 billion rainy day fund. And thank God we had that rainy day fund. We're looking at a $52 billion deficit in this current budget. That's all the result of what's happened in two months. We're probably going to see a lot of changes in state funding of programs. We're going to see a lot of changes in state and county funding and local government funding. It's going to happen, and we're just barely beginning to see the effect that this crisis is having on local government revenues. So we've really got to keep our eyes open to see what's going on and make sure we're managing our revenue bases and saying, I can't really count on that revenue the way I thought I might be able to even 2 or 3 weeks ago, because everything is going to change. And the way we best structure, I think there are 2 things. One is have rigorous, tight financial controls and try to reduce your expenses to the greatest level you can, and also reach out to people. And I think that Stephen and Susie are going to follow up on exactly those topics. Having collaboration, having people we can count on, having people we can work with is really going to be critical to moving ahead through this crisis into a situation where our organizations can continue to deliver the services that are so important. With that, I'll look for any questions. If Mihai will send me any questions, or if they're in the chats, I'd be happy to answer some. If there are any technical questions, and I'm going to turn everything over to Susie.
I have a quick question, and my chat isn't working. Can you hear me okay?
Mute myself.
Just for,
Unmute myself would be helpful. Go ahead. You had a question, Darcy.
Go ahead, Darcy.
Thank you. For the PPP for payroll, and there's been 85, and we're now calling 1099s, like employees. So is 1099 payments considered payroll for the PPP program?
No, it's not. So you cannot, the current guidance is that you cannot be using PPP money to pay an independent contractor.
Thank you.
You could use it, maybe you could have used it in calculating your loan amount, but now that you're spending the money, the answer is no. They're looking at people being on the payroll.
Thank you.
I had a quick question too before we move forward for Jeremy and Stephen. So we are using a lot of our PPP loan for payroll, and luckily we're getting some rent forgiveness for our office space. But something I was wondering if either of you know if we can use the PPP loan towards storage units, that kind of rent.
I haven't seen any guidance on that, and so I would say the word is rent, and it's, I'm going to look. While we're doing this, I'm going to look to see if there's anything. But if you're renting a storage unit and it's part of your operations, I think you at least have a claim. I'm not going to be your lawyer here or your accountant, and it's probably worth talking to your accountant or an attorney about it. But I haven't seen anything on that. The term has just been for rent or for mortgage payments.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So
what about for copier leases? So leases are something that I think that a term was used in addition to rent and mortgage, but what about leases of equipment?
This has been an issue that a lot of people have been poking around at what the word utilities means. Does utilities just mean what we traditionally thought, like gas and electric? And people are saying, well, what about phones? What about internet? What about copy machines? And Julie, I wish I could give you great guidance on it, and I can't, because terms are so undefined. And what we expect is that over the next few weeks, there will probably be some increasing definition. But I think anything out of the most obvious, you've got a risk that someone's going to say, no, that's disqualified. And it may be such a small risk that you're willing to bear it. But we're just at a tough time about what's applicable and what's not. There's no guidance on that kind of question. I'm sorry, but there just isn't right now.
Question. Hi there. So we're an affordable housing developer. Is mortgage, would that be considered for our properties as well, or solely for our general operating?
Again, I wish I could tell you.
Okay.
It's not defined. That's one I would, I would go ask the accountant you're working with to see if they can dig down any further, because it may be that those relate to some SBA regulations that are buried in the SBA. That's a pretty sophisticated way of taking an approach at it, and it may be in there, but I just wish I could tell you, but there's no guidance in the program right now.
Thank you.
I think one of the things people are doing is they're looking at, okay, so we've got to make the 75% on employees. So that leaves you 25%. And then you list your other expenses you think you might be able to charge against the PPP loan in the hierarchy of safety. And if your mortgage and your rent and et cetera take up the 25%, you don't need to worry about the rest of the question. See, so it's kind of like stay as safe as you can, but start with the premise that 75% already goes to employees, and so you only have 25% to work with.
Yeah, I have very little other expenses, so that's why I'm trying to figure out how I can fill that other 25% with legitimate expenses. Yeah. I will probably have to pay some of it back just because I don't have the expenses.
We'll send you a rent receipt.
And Julie, remember, you'll have that as a loan
Right.
for 2 years at 1%. So that gives you some cash flow relief going forward if that's the situation you're in. But I think you're
Right.
Yeah, we all have to ask these questions. What's the optimal way to use that money for what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, with the little interest cost, I wasn't concerned that it would be partially paid back, but for the benefit, it was well worth it to be able to get the payroll covered and the minimal rent that we do pay covered. So we're good.
Good.
And Jeremy, if I can add, I was on a call and they were talking about that, specifically all the kind of ambivalence around the 25%. And they said there would be some clarity when the application came through, when you're actually going to have to apply to get it forgiven. There'd be clear directives around that, but right now there is not a copy of that. But certainly they recognize that there's kind of, people are unsure about that. But when you apply to have it forgiven, then they'll have clear direction. That's what we were told anyway.
Yeah, and we're spending the money now without direction.
Yep.
So it's just so crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, we're spending it on what we need to spend it on, hopefully. So either way,
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Okay, Susie.
I'm up. Okay. Good morning, everyone. For those, it's nice to see so many people on Friday. Thank you, Stephen, Mihai, and Jeremy for including us in this call. I do actually have a quick PowerPoint, not a lot. And I appreciate, let me just share my screen if I can with you guys. I'll do this. Yeah. Okay, so all the technology. Here we go. So can you guys see my screen and still talk? Yeah. There we go. Perfect. So for a lot of you on the call, I know you're part of the collaborative or part of the alumni that have come through our project. My name is Susan Gomez. I represent a group of about 87 nonprofits here in San Bernardino, Riverside County. We do capacity building for nonprofits. And we have for those that don't know much about us, we've been in existence for about 10 years, but the reason for the call today that Stephen and Mihai and Jeremy asked me to speak was really talking to you as a group during this kind of really tumultuous time. Is there ways that we can partner better? Is there ways that we can collaborate to make the work we're doing more effective? So we're going to talk about some of the lessons that the IACC has learned, but most importantly, we want to take a look at why some organizations or collaboratives work and sometimes when they don't. So there we go. So by the end of this, short presentation that I'm doing, I'm hoping that for those on the call today, we'll have it, kind of the objective for us is to know the difference between when you're coordinating with an organization or each other and what really true collaboration is. And there is significant distinctions between those. And I'm sure as many of you are on the call, you guys, we always hear, you're going to be joining part of a collaborative, but that's significantly different on the differences, distinguishing characteristics of each. We also want to make sure that you kind of avoid some of the mistakes that a lot of collaborations do make. Give you some examples, and as well as I'm sure you have your own that you've experienced. And we want to really, the purpose for this presentation today is position you at this time to be successful in the work that you're doing and recognize that you really cannot do this alone. We are stronger together than we are when you're trying to do this important work by yourselves. And then give some examples, and I have all my friends on the call that maybe can jump in on what has worked for us as a collaborative and some of the things that we did and did not do wrong. So the question out to you guys today is really, when you first hear the word collaborate, or is there certain words that come to mind? And you can put them in the chat box if you want. We've had the negative and the positive around it, but some of you might be adverse to collaboration, and that's fine too. But I think for most of us, especially a few years back, we always think of collaboration as somehow it's putting yourself in a position of being competitive. there's a lot of mistrust in some collaborations that you're participating in, and that certainly was my experience as well, and many of us that now are in IECC. And many times we're forced, sometimes by a funder, sometimes just by the nature of the work that we do, because you are a foster agency, you have to be part of this group. That doesn't always make the most successful in terms of collaborative efforts. And inefficiency is another common, it's a waste of time. I keep coming to these meetings, but nobody ever does anything. We don't do anything. We keep meeting, but there's no end product or no deliverables, right? I'm sure many of you have also seen that happen as well. And the other part is collaboration is very complicated, and I would concur with that. It is complicated, it is difficult. It is not an easy process because it requires more of each individual that's part of a group, and but the rewards are significant. So that is important to note. And I think the other elements for us when Mihai and Stephen asked me to talk about this was what kind of resonated to the top of the list for us as a group that we've been together now almost 10 years, is that we generally all really like each other, which is a good start. But more importantly, we trust and respect one another, and we frequently communicate, and we have embedded in our informal and informal and formal communication policies around what that looks like. And I'm going to elevate that on this slide because one of those examples is just based on what's happening right now with COVID and the work that we normally do. We quickly recognized, okay, these monthly executive team meetings, okay, that's not going to suffice right now. Everything is changing by the hour, by the day. So we now meet, actually, since this crisis started, on a weekly basis. Sometimes the calls can be 15 or 20 minutes. Sometimes they can be 2 hours, because that's what it's taking for us to make decisions and pivot from the work that we have. I don't think that it would be as effective if we hadn't already put those policies in place for us. So we have certain benchmarks for ourselves that if we find things are dropping off, we quickly then come back to our, what are we going to do? We're going back to our weekly meetings until we fix this, right? And I think the other final point on this slide is really a commitment to the long-term involvement. It's easy, and I do remember at the beginning when we started this process, especially because my organization at the time, I was working at Inland Regional Center, a rather large nonprofit, and I got a grant into this project. And after the second year into this, they kept saying, well, why are you still going, right? You're not getting any money. It hasn't really, we haven't seen you, get any grants. So we don't see value in you keep attending. The value was that, and as we continue, I can share a little more, it was really exponentially beneficial to all of us, not individually, but collectively as a group. So this is the continuum of collaboration. We like to use this because it's it kind of clearly demonstrates the distinctions, and the importance for you to kind of understand the continuum of collaboration is that many times when you're in groups or partnerships or existing collaborations, everyone calls it a collaborative, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a networking meeting, and the level, it doesn't require any kind of risk to reward. You keep your own organization pretty much firmly in what you do, but you just exchange information. Here comes cooperation. It's a little bit more, you start matching what you're doing, and I'll use the foster agencies because there's like 7 of them in our collaborative. They start looking at ways on how they can cooperate with each other in terms of their activities. Let's look at our calendars. Let's not do events on the same day. But it really is not a big risk or to your organization. A little more trust. Here comes coordination. Coordination is more individualized work that aligns to the greater outcomes. And for us, and many of us, we mostly sit in that kind of category of coordination of services for each other or in our communities. All of us really have to in order to survive. And we do it quite well, I would say, here in the Inland Empire, because we have limited resources, right? But the distinction when you move into actual collaboration, it is all the three above, right? It is sharing resources. It is enhancing the capacity for the benefit of just not yourselves, but the common purpose for your for the community you are providing services for, right? The distinction also, though, is that you have come together with a shared mission about how you're going to do the work, right? It no longer becomes what's good for me in my organization as we participate in this collaborative. It is now what's best for the full group of us as we move forward. And I think of the most questions that's asked of me as being the president or the leader of the IECC has been that, right? How do you guys, really just give up your identity for the full group, right? And I would say it is a seismic change in the way you do business. Without question, it is. You cannot be thinking about, is this funding, fundraising event that we're doing going to affect my organization? No. Is this going to help the community as a whole, as a group of us as we move forward? Yes. It is a different way of thinking, and it does require a sacrifice and the ability to see a long-term gain for yourselves and your community, most importantly. So here are the great things about collaboration. We look at it as saying, you put more people in a room, you bring the expertise in the room. And that's certainly, I'm sure many of you might have had that experience, but certainly for us, the diversity amongst us is really the strength of our group. The more opportunities that we can share and coordinate resources, the better we do not only our own work, but the work in the community. And I think the other way is, of course, and is the generating of income. We start to see probably in the second and third year, the really strength of us looking at not being competitors anymore. And it did take us that long, and we made a lot of mistakes. But it was smarter for us to look at who in the room would be better in a lead on an application than it would be for all of us to compete for the same dollars. And is there an opportunity that there is other organizations that are in the collaborative that never would have even been considered for funding? Faith-based organizations, all volunteer organizations, could we elevate them and bring them alongside us and have them walk alongside us as we move forward? And then that's when we started seeing the real impact about what we were, the potential of what we could actually do. So, and this one regarding relationships, the example that I give early on, I was a social worker. I worked with clients with disabilities. I didn't live in this world of really truly nonprofit, and I didn't have cultivated relationships with elected officials. It wasn't my world. I didn't even know who my assembly person was. I'm being honest. I didn't live in that world. But many of the nonprofits in the collaborative, they did. They had strong cultivations with elected officials. So we were stronger. I don't have that strength, but 6 other nonprofits or agencies in our collaborative do. When we would have an event, we would have a strong turnout of elected officials, and that's just one example. So that's the strength of what you can do as a group. And I think ultimately, again, it's about services and what kind of impact and outcomes we're able to provide when we're working together. And here's some of the ones, and I'll put it last or kind of at the end, because I think many of you have been where they don't work as well. One of the most notable, and this is research kind of based things, Bridgespan did a study on collaborations, and there's been a lot of work around collaboration. And one of the key markers of when they don't work is a lack of leadership or transient leadership. A lot of movement at the top leads to not having great outcomes for collaboratives. Unequal involvement or recognition of members. We quickly recognize, and even for us when we do these presentations today, I generally don't do this presentation by myself. I always do this with most of us partnering with each other, because it is not my voice, it's our voice as we move forward. It's important that that voice looks, it depicts the diversity amongst us, and it also builds the capacity of all of us in the collaborative, right? We all need to have better leadership skills, and if there's opportunities to do that, we always welcome that, and it's important for us to share leadership and recognition. The unrealistic goals or demands on a collaborative, we faced those the first 2 years. I will say honestly, and some of you in the room were part of that, our first year, we thought our best option to fundraise was put on a triathlon. Yeah. It was crazy, I know, but unrealistic, absolutely. Was it crazy demanding on all of us that we're all EDs on our own programs, and then we decided to do this triathlon in Big Bear or Lake Arrowhead? But we learned, and we know now how to manage to that. So, and then there comes the traditional kind of obstacles, the turf battle competition. You can say you're in a collaborative, but if there's not trust, and there's still this sentiment that, what am I going to get out of this? Or what am I going to risk if I stay in the room, right? Then that really is not true collaboration. If there is questions about any intentionality about how the work is done, then that also doesn't work. It has to be communicated and it has to be discussed openly. The other thing is the unwillingness to fully contribute resources. Example for us was early on, each of us, of course, as all nonprofits do, you have your own funders, you have your own resources. We decided, okay, we're going to have to put our own funders up into the full group, not our own. That was a different ask for most organizations, and honestly, not everyone could surpass that obstacle, to be honest. And I understood it completely. And it wasn't until there was examples where we were seeing that the reward was better when everyone risked and was in that room, fully involved, fully willing to say, and I'll use David, who's in the room. He's a foster agency and another foster agency. He's going through something that, for his compliance, and it was easy for him. His competitor offered to help him, and now he does that the same for someone else. It has to be that unselfishness on how we do the work. The poor planning and all of that, I think most of us know what that looks like. And a lot of collaboratives also get mired in the whole, let's build this collaborative and spend much too much time around how, descriptions and how it's going to look and who's going to be in charge, but nothing gets done. So there has to be an even understanding about that, and when that starts to happen, to be conscious of that and maybe move up faster. So for us on the final notes, I already kind of spoke a little bit about this. We started 10 years ago. It was a group of 10 of us that came through a project through First Five San Bernardino. We were grantees, and they wanted to do this pilot project for capacity building. It was supposed to end in a year. And what happened on the second year is they provided some TA for all of us. We could get a fund development, we could get strategic planning. And what happened was we all came together and said, what if we pooled our dollars for this TA, and all of us could get fundraising and all of us could get strategic planning. And it was smarter for us to pool our TA hours. And that's how we generally started. 2 years later, we formalized ourselves, elected officers. We had our fiscal sponsor was the Community Foundation. 3 years ago now, this year, we filed for our own 501c3. There's now 87 nonprofits that have come through the project. We now are the trainers of the Capacity Building Academy. It was important for us to be changing the narrative about what we look like as nonprofits in the region. We did not want to be reliant on funder or consultants. We felt that we needed to be the training kind of model to be able to exponentially help other nonprofits as we move forward. So I think one of the biggest rewards for us is seeing that now we've raised a little over $19.2 million collectively amongst us. That's probably the most attention we get now from funders about how we do that. And some of our new work is reflected on that. We are in contract now ourselves to help other entities be collaborative and work in cooperatives and expand their programs and expand their funding. So that's been exciting for us. And I think for most of us here, you know, the capacity building counties, we just looked at the collective impact model, the shared purpose like we talked about. But I will end with this. All of our work has always been from our inception about the strength base, coming from a position of strength, not as a position of, you know, we can't do this because we don't have money. We can't do this, you know, that scarcity mentality has never been part of our DNA, let's say. We make every decision based on strengths amongst us, strengths around us, and that's the premise that we work and do all the work as we move forward. So I think at the end for us, we wanted to create this legacy of better nonprofits because of the perception. And we talk about Irvine, but really we are in response to Irvine. And building the capacity was important, showcasing what nonprofits in the Inland Empire could do. That continues to be a focus for us this day. And expand what a successful collaboration looks like. It is this opportunity today to be here talking about us that helps us recognize we don't want you to make the same mistakes you have made. Are there ways for you to identify what works and what hasn't? And our hope is that when you enter into these opportunities, that you'll have like a clear outline about what that looks like. So it does take a little bit longer. Some of these are the bigger lessons. It is exciting. For me, it's probably the best work I've ever done in my life, to be honest. It's the most rewarding because it is fulfilling, because I have such great support around me. I've never had an environment where everyone wants the best for each other and best for our own organization. It is a unique environment to be in. It is a privilege to be around all the members, and several of them are on the call, but it truly, I say that often, it is. And it also is a way to demonstrate a different approach on how outcomes could look like. This is system changing work. It takes longer, and not a lot of funders understand it. Not a lot of organizations understand it. And if you do it well, the rewards are, you know, significant. So I think the last, just for me, is you know, the collective impact, with us thinking about us rather than we. And then I think professionally, we all really want to make sure that these opportunities, when you walk into collaborations, that it not only helps you as a professional, but it also helps your own organization. So there has to be a win-win for the organizations that are in the room, but most notably, it has to be a win-win for the community that we serve. And that's it. So
thank you, Susie. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the work you guys have done and are doing. And from a kind of a theoretical model, you guys exemplify what was known as a platform organization, which we think has a lot more opportunity for survival over time. And we have another word we use for it in the community, which is you have a table. You work at a table with others. And so you're one of those table governance organizations. And so we really appreciate you, and so glad you could be with us today. I'm going to run through some of the key issues on sustainability going forward. We recognized this as an issue about 8 months ago, and decided to put together a series of master classes on sustainability, impact, leadership, and transformation, and have been working on it for a while. And then COVID happened, and we all kind of went, okay, we're in a different world order. And so we've gone ahead and revised our master class and started offering it. And it's a masterclass on survival and sustainability. And we actually have a couple of folks who participated in it a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be doing it again at the very end of the month and again in June. It's an online seminar, and you can check out the videos and the ebooks and everything on our website. But I wanted to go over some key issues as we look into the future and think about where we're going to be in 6 months and 18 months and in the future. And I'm going to hit it pretty fast, so buckle up. So we always talk about this every time, and Jeremy referred to it time and time again, but you've got to make sure you understand your operations of your business now and start projecting what it's going to be over the next few months. Most of our funding comes from third-party reimbursement, and that is going to be so impacted, as Jeremy said, from state and local government budgets being slaughtered by the loss of tax revenue, and we're already seeing it in many cities and counties, and it's just going to get much worse. And so you've got to make sure that you understand your numbers, that they're accurate, and that you constantly revise your cash flow projections so that you can manage to your cash flow. And there's no substitute for that. That's the reality. Nobody's going to rescue you. And these PPP loans were designed in a day when we thought this was going to be over in 60 days. And it's not. And so that you get some help with your employees, it's great. As Julie was saying, this is good money to have. But the truth is, it's not going to save you. You've got to save yourself. The second issue is that you need good advisors around you. And Jeremy referred to this as well, but you need a kitchen cabinet. Aside from, really, do you have the board that you need? And are they functioning in the way you want them to be? This is the time to take a look at that, because you're going to see who are the people who really stand behind you and who don't. And do you have the right staff? You may have to pick and choose among your staff in a survival period. And you want to be very smart about how you do that. And your goal is not to protect your friendships and your relationship, but to protect the health of your organization. And so you really need to be smart about the team that you reassemble as time goes on. And it may not be pretty. And third, you need a kitchen cabinet, a group of 3 or 4 people that you can trust, who will be candid with you, that respect you and you respect them, that it's like your personal board of directors that you can go to and bounce ideas off. And if you don't have that, please think about how you can do that. You also need to be very smart about your communication and make sure that you have a narrative that is candid and truthful, and also gets the point across about the importance of what you're doing and how you're going to be doing it, that you can share with your employees, the people you serve, but also all of your donors and your stakeholders. And so you also need to think about how to segment your audience that's listening to you. While you have one general narrative, you need to speak to different issues to different people, because people are experiencing different things, particularly the people that we serve. And so those are very important, and we need to open up and use all kinds of channels of communication, including online channels and surrogates that can carry our message for us, and really focus on what's working today, because we've all gone online. So those are some of the keys. In the area of fundraising, a lot of people have started canceling all their events and really being very concerned. And I think the 2 big issues here is that you want to figure out what is your pipeline of donors? Where do donors come from? And you want to protect that pipeline, and you want to be able to communicate with your key donors online now, and you want to be able to keep open your pipeline. So if you get your key donors farming from events, then you need to look at who attends your events and be in communication with them. If it comes from direct mail, you need to keep up your direct mail. If it comes from alumni groups or membership groups, you need to be in touch with them. And Right now, obviously, we're not getting a bunch of people together in an event, and probably anywhere within 2 months out at any given time, you probably should be canceling an online or a in-person event. But I think those of you who are looking at events in the fall and the early year should consider leaving them on your calendar, because a lot's going to change. Now, most people believe they're not going to look like they looked in the past, but there are some ways of doing online events as well, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But this idea about understanding your business, making sure you're clear. This issue that Susie brought up is, we think a lot of organizations that are trying to do 20 things, that we have programs all over the county and we do mental health and drug addiction and all of these things, you're going to end up contracting, and you're going to end up needing to focus on what you think is most important and you can survive doing. So to do what we need to do for our clients, we think we're going to have to do more partnerships, more collaboratives, more coordination. And so we really wanted to emphasize that as an important strategy for survival, putting the people we serve in highest priority over anything else we do. How can we help make sure they get what they need now? And it may not be just what we provide them. How can we help coordinate a bigger picture with other partners in the community? So I'm going to move on because we don't have a lot of time, and I want to talk about technology for a moment, because technology is critical to us. Also, we know that the Inland Empire Community Foundation is focusing on this as a grant program in their new round of grants to help not-for-profits obtain the technology they need. First of all, I want to say you need to engage your members virtually, and I was just talking about this, but making sure that you have web pages, that you're on Facebook, that you're on Instagram, and that they integrate with the rest of your information, and that people can find you and hear about you, and you're in front of them continually. You need to focus in on face-to-face communication with video conferencing. Now, you guys are all on Zoom, and so you know quite a bit about it probably already. I'm going to encourage you and your leadership team that you learn a lot more about how these techniques, WebEx, the stuff on Google, Zoom, how they work, how you can manipulate them, how you can work them to your advantage. We saw Academy Go yesterday do a very interesting panel online, and we're using some new techniques online that I thought went very well for them. So you also need to look, as you're looking at the different kinds of applications, there are a lot of places to go. A number of the suppliers are giving trial runs or discounts to not-for-profit, and I would definitely suggest you look at TechSoup as a place to purchase and subscribe to different apps. It's so much cheaper, and they have a pretty good inventory of stuff. So you need to invest in all these digital channels, and look at where you can get them inexpensively. We also need to use technology to adapt to change that's happening, accelerating much faster than we were. And if you haven't noticed, you're probably communicating to a much smaller group. And there's a gap often between our membership and our clients and the organization that's going to continue to grow bigger and bigger. And what we have to do is first acknowledge that and understand how it's happening, and work towards closing that gap in any way that we can figure out how to do it. And it may be, you know, in using things like this, but there's also people online that are real opinion leaders often to the community you want to be talking to. So those are the people that you want to provide information for, support for. And when I worked in disabilities, it was the mommy bloggers that had the most influence and conveyed the most reliable information to families. And so working with them was as important as working with anybody, any other audience we worked with, because it leveraged good knowledge, information, care, etc., out the door. There's a number of new apps that are designed to do conferencing online. And I don't mean like Zoom, but I mean with hundreds of people, with panels, with breakout sessions, the whole model that we used to see in person. And one of them that's supposed to be particularly good is called Run the World. And they're waiving setup fees, and there's some real advantages, of course, because you don't have the physical costs. You don't have the pollution. You can solve logistical problems, accessibility concerns, and you can really lower the cost of participation. And so people are really going out the door trying this, and Run the World is kind of a built on what Zoom is, but in much more detail. So I want to recommend that. You also need to start digitalizing your manual processes. And this means like clouding your information and locking it up and making sure it's secure. I'm on the board of an organization in Florida that had was hacked by, and they wanted $160,000 to give back all of our financial and HR information. We said no and had to bring in outside people to recreate all of our finances and HR documents. And, you need to make sure that you have other access to your data, and clouding is one of the best ways of doing it. So you need to invest in the right tools to also start integrating all your work, because if people are going to be working much more remotely, and you still need to bring them together and keep your operations intact, you really need a system that can do single sign-ons, if there's any e-commerce, your conferences, manage your membership, keep your talent database, keep your HR database, your content management, your customer relationship management. There are omni systems that out there that you really need to look at. One of the most used is the Salesforce for not-for-profits. So that's very important. You also need to think about using technology for your contingency plans. So if, like, you know, in the past when we've had fires or big storms, to know how to get a hold of your staff and your clients and make sure they're okay, and how if somebody gets hurt or sick, that you have somebody else to step in to do their job role. This can all be done through technology. And then as I was talking a moment ago about the hack, you need to take a look at your security and evaluate your own risk tolerance and consider creative ways to enhance your security. And one of them is the way you use passwords and the way you have backups for information and able to keep it secure. And I do think that over time, we're going to find ourselves doing much more secure Zoom work. So, so stay calm, think long-term, think about where you're going to be in 18 to 24 months, do your cash flows, and hang in there, and we'll be talking to you more. So thank you so much for your time. I'm wrapping it up kind of quickly, but we've gone over, and I really don't like going over. So we're going to stop. But if you have questions, please stay online and ask them. We'll be glad to answer what we can. But that's it for today. Thanks so much for being here. Good to see everybody.